Hi folks, I am back here again today with my good friend Dr. Luke Gordon of the University of New Mexico and Word Safari, which, if you are interested in etymology, that is the study of word origins, is a YouTube channel that you really need to be following, because Luke posts these themed discussions of related groups of vocabulary and talks about how where that vocabulary comes from. Right now you're working on vocabulary surrounding heaven and hell, is that right?
That's right. We've been doing a series on religious terminology, terms that are important to various religions, essentially. A lot of these terms happen to come from Greek and Latin, terms like prayer, sacrifice, things like that. And so I happen to know a lot about Greek and Latin and their etymology, so we've been talking about some of the histories of those terms, but we've recently talked about the terms heaven and hell, which do not have Greek and Latin etymologies, even though we use them in translation for ideas that come from the ancient Mediterranean and ultimately from the Judeo-Christian tradition, which of course is not originally written in Greek and Latin, but then came to be heavily influenced by Greek and Latin thought. So the reason that we're doing this collaboration today is because on Word Safari, as I just mentioned, we've been talking about heaven and hell, and these are both terms with Germanic etymologies. In other words, these are terms that are native to English. They haven't been borrowed from Greek, Latin, Hebrew, or anything else. So you're the person to talk to about this. What do you want to start with? Hell or heaven? What's your inclination, up or down?
Let's start with heaven.
Okay.
So, this word in Old English, heaven, is not specifically a religious word, right? So, in modern English, heaven has often religious connotations, or at least, spiritual, poetic connotations. But in Old English, it's just the sky. And as you've pointed out, in most languages, heaven and sky are the same word, right? Cielo doesn't have a specifically religious connotation, but then it's used of the place that's mentioned in the Bible too. What's interesting in English is that this native word for the sky, heaven, is replaced in daily life with a word from Old Norse ski, modern Icelandic ski, which is clouds. Now, how exactly clouds comes to take over as the word for sky, I couldn't exactly tell you. It's a funny thing that happens in English sometimes, is we borrow Norse words for things we already had words for and then make them mean something slightly different. But there you have it, and it's clearly a Norse borrowing because it has a ska, and native English words have sha. It is not impossible, I was reflecting earlier, that maybe shy is actually from that same root, because you cover your face, because this ultimately is a root for covering, which cover roots are very common in words of both heaven and hell, we'll get to. You cover your face when you're shy, or your face is kind of, if you're bashful, right? But I don't know. The Old Norse skug is shadow, from the same root. English shadow might be too, if that ska complex is all related to covering, which I think it could be.
Yeah, so sky comes from a root that means to cover, which makes sense because the clouds cover the sky, and like you just said, this would have originally referred to clouds, and then through some semantic shift of some kind, we now use it for even, the blue sky behind us that only has a few little clouds back there, as you can see. Okay, so the that old word helvon, for in Old English, for instance, and in other cognates in Germanic languages, just referred to the sky. Could it also refer to more of a spiritual? Maybe spiritual isn't quite the right word, but a divine home of the gods.
Yeah, right. Because God lives on heaven, in Old English, in heaven.
Right.
By the way.
And that's not just a Christian or Judeo-Christian concept that is borrowed. Was that already there in the Norse religions?
I'm talking about Old English, where really all of our written sources are Christian.
Sure.
In Old Norse, it's not that clear that the gods live in the sky. They live above us, but it might be on a mountaintop. It might be more of an Olympus situation.
Sure.
It's not that clear that all sky are supposed to be in the sky.
Okay.
I was just going to mention one quick thing about that heaven word, because it's kind of interesting how in different Germanic languages you get different dissimulations.
Yeah.
The root of the Proto-Germanic is probably himmin. It's Gothic himmens. It's Old Norse himmen. But in English, that first M has been dissimilated from the N, right? It's become a non-nasal fricative F. And then in German, it's the N at the end that gets dissimilated from the M and becomes the non-nasal liquid L, Himmel, right? Which is then borrowed into Norwegian, Swedish, Danish as Himmel.
Okay, so the shall we say, spiritual or religious nature of this word is actually pretty unclear in the pre-Christian environment of Proto-Germanic or early Germanic languages.
I'd say it has no religious connotation.
Interesting.
And certainly in Old Norse it doesn't have a religious connotation.
Okay, so that religious connotation may well have been completely borrowed with Christianity.
Yep, and of course the word, in German, Himmel doesn't mean...
Sure.
Doesn't have the religious connotation that its obvious English cognate heaven does.
Right, and we're really just doing that because we now use sky for the clear
the
non-religious connotation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so this is part of what happens when you have words that get specialized for religious use, even if they don't originally have religious connotation. I mean, this isn't the only one. Pray, right, is actually not originally necessarily.
Yeah, we actually just talked about this word on the last Word Safari episode.
So, but when words get that religious connotation, speakers tend to kind of like fence them off.
Right.
And so English speakers
become holier. They become more sacred. There's two words we've talked about in a couple of recent Word Safari episodes as well. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about heaven, or should we move on to hell?
Well, you were saying that the Indo-European origin of this word.
Right. Let's talk about that really quick.
Potentially chem, a root for cover. What were some cognates there outside of Germanic?
I mean, the biggest one seems to be this com or chem word that means shirt in some of the Romance languages, like camisa in Spanish and chemise in French.
Something that covers your body.
Something that covers your body, yeah. But there aren't a lot of really good cognates. I mean, that's not a great cognate set.
Yeah. So I'm going to suspend judgment on whether that's an Indo-European root. That may just be a European bond of order.
It seems like possibly the best guess as to where the word heaven might come from, and the Proto-Germanic term might come from, but it's not a slam dunk. And Calvert Watkins, who is a great Indo-European linguist, had another concept.
Yes. May he rest in peace.
Yes, Jackson got his autograph in 2008, so I was there for that.
I did. I have a picture of that. I should probably post with this. He suggested that it is from the same root. I guess it would be the same root that you would see in like Latin acme or something, right? It's the sharp root. So something like kmen. So get this like heck root in the zero grade, and then add that men suffix, which occurs in some nouns. So I guess it would give you like Germanic human. I don't know how the first vowel becomes I, but like it's interesting.
It's interesting, yeah.
So I guess not that the sky is sharp, but that the root is actually originally like rock or something like that. So it's like the firmament. Not another word for sky.
We're covered by a big stone or a big rock. I mean, there's weirder cosmologies out there.
And that's actually not an uncommon cosmology. It's not, as far as we know, the pre-Christian Norse cosmology, where that's a skull. Right? That's a skull of Ymir, the first living being.
Yeah.
But it's not very often that you have, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this. I feel like you can't very often read theology out of the names for things like that.
Well, you can try, but you might be wrong, because sometimes there might be some word that did mean something at some point, at some phase of cultural evolution, but it doesn't mean that to those people anymore, even if they still use the term.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of this might be north, south, east, west, which in Norse myth are the names of the four dwarves who hold up the corners of the sky. No one thinks of them as dwarf names.
Right, yet we still use the terms that come from this.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, the names are probably from the directions rather than the other way around. But no one has the association anyway. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, words that used to have, powerful connotations of blessing or curse have lost those connotations over time. I mean, people say go to hell to their friends all the time in a jokey way and don't mean the powerful curse that once meant.
Sure.
But speaking of which, let's talk about hell.
Yeah, let's do it. So if heaven was not a particularly religious concept originally in the pre-Christian era of Germanic speakers, hell was somewhat more religious. Is that right?
Yeah, so this is another root for cover, right? So the Latin word conceal. So
The seal part.
The word, it is borrowed into English, and among other places the word conceal.
Right.
Latin cellare, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that kel, which is hide. Grimm's law, cuz become huz in Germanic, so hell is actually a direct cognate with this.
Yeah.
Hell is what's hidden, it's what's under the earth. The same root gives us hole, right? Something dug into the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Holster, a place where you hide your 6-gun. So there's a fairly good complex of words associated with something kind of hiding, something in Germanic. So there's a very, very physical conception of the afterlife in Norse myth. Right?
This isn't some spiritual place that's not in our universe.
No,
It's
when you
literally down.
When you put someone in the grave, you're putting them in hell.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and it's
You're concealing them in the ground.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's very explicitly talked about. In fact, in the Saga of Hervor and Haetheric, there's the poem Hervarakvida, or often in English called The Waking of Angantyr, where the woman hero Hervor breaks into the grave mound of her father, Angantyr, and he's not alive, but he speaks to her. Right? I mean, he inhabits his corpse, and speaks to her, and it's like a zombie.
Yeah.
And he refers to himself as being in hell. When she opens the grave mound, he says, "Hell's gates are open." Right? I think this is originally what we're looking at in talking about hell, is it's the place underground where you've put the dead. Now, once you've hidden them down there, once you've hold them up, there's a sense, well, we don't know what's going on down there. Maybe they're visiting each other. Maybe they're in association with each other. Maybe there's kind of a community down there. And I think that's where the notion of hell as kind of a realm arises. But in Norse myth, I mean, even in something like the Prose Edda, where we have to take things with a little bit of a grain of salt because Snorri Sturluson is a Christian, but he does write with good understanding of these earlier beliefs. He discusses hell as a place where people eat and drink and sleep, right? Where they seem to live in families, like on farms. Like it's a shadow of our realm. It's like, well, what are the dead doing? Well, we're ancient or medieval people. I mean, our conception of what the dead are doing is what the living are doing.
Sure. Right?
They're farming and whatever, but they're just doing it down there where we put them. And I think that's much closer to an original idea of what hell means. Now, I think, obviously, there are later versions of this that are influenced by Christianity to one degree or another, sometimes lightly, sometimes heavily. The notion of hell as a place of fiery punishment isn't even, to my understanding of reading the Bible, that clear in the Bible.
Right.
Right? I mean,
certainly not in the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament.
No,
you
certainly
get
not.
Sheol, which is a lot like this Germanic concept of hell, and also I'd point out a lot like the Greek concept of Hades, which is just a dark place under the ground that people hang out. And the etymology of Hades, the best etymology we have is Aides, which means the unseen one, which would have been the god Hades, of course, but also the unseen place, which is concealed. So there may actually be a similar etymology there, and I think that's a similar concept as well. So going back to what you just said, yeah, in the Bible you have Sheol more in the Old Testament, Hades in the New Testament, which is a Greek loanword, of course, and a Greek word because the New Testament is written in Greek. But yeah, both of those are the central concept, and then you do have these allusions to what we would call hellfire, like in one of Jesus's parables, in the book of Revelation, where even there it's a separate place from the original hell. It says Hades gets thrown into the lake of fire. It doesn't say Hades is the lake of fire in the book of Revelation. So
yeah, and I don't want to sound like I'm throwing anyone under the bus, because I'm one of the people that I'm throwing under the bus if I am here. But there is a kind of, I'm gonna try to be gentle in my term for it, because I don't mean it to be insulting, low information Protestant version of hell.
How about this? This is the term I use. Pop
Christian
culture.
version of hell,
I say
yeah.
the pop culture ideas of heaven and hell when I'm teaching this in
okay.
my class.
Okay.
Which honestly, people, you don't have to be Christian or Jewish or Muslim or anything to have an idea of what these pop culture ideas are of heaven and hell that are kind of just lurking out there. They show up in paintings and movies and books.
Right.
But like you said, people may not know exactly where those come from, and it
Yeah.
may not necessarily be from where they think they come from.
What I'm getting to, and I'm not trying to Bible or not myself here to refer to a game with my sister, is I grew up with very clear pictures of what heaven and hell were. From
You hear it from the pulpit,
yeah,
and
from
again,
my
you
mom
see it in movies. It's not just a
Yeah,
religious
yeah.
thing; it's out there in the culture.
And heaven is this place with soft clouds where people wear white
Right.
clothes and they have
Right.
halos around them and they play harps. And hell is a place where guys with pitchforks and goatees make you burn,
Yeah.
And once I had actually read the Bible, I was like, well, that's really not in here.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you can read a lot, but I mean, that's so true of so many traditions, right? I mean,
Sure.
a lot of what people picture for the pagan concepts of Oscarther and hell is also influenced by that same like traditional oral pop culture sense of heaven and hell, much more than anything you read in the Eddas,
Yeah.
right? Where Oscarther is again like vaguely above us, but not necessarily in the sky. Snorri understands it is in the sky, kind of inconsistently, but there's a rainbow bridge to it, and that doesn't mean that it's not at the top of a mountain, because it has physical ground to it, and they sometimes ride out of it.
Sure.
So I don't know. I also don't necessarily think that people had a super consistent idea of where these places were, right? There's somewhere other,
Yeah.
right? And underground is other, right? And that's
Sure.
part of I think what we forget that unites these conceptions of heaven and hell is they're both out of reach,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can dig a little ways underground, but you don't live underground. You can jump into the sky, but you don't live in the sky. So they're places that are separate from us, and I think that the notion of fiery hell is also, in a sense, kind of like just an exaggeration of that to the nth degree, because of course the living can't be in a place of fire.
Right. So to go back to the specific translation issue here, I think it's interesting that this is the term, because there are other terms for various places in the afterlife in Germanic tradition, right? It's interesting that the translators of the Christian scriptures into Old English and other Germanic languages chose this term.
Well, I don't think it's that surprising.
I don't mean
Ultimately,
surprising, but it's interesting, like, of all the choices they had, this is the one they used.
Yeah, I mean, hell is can be used metonymously for just death,
Yeah.
right? So even men who kill each other in battle in the Norse sources, where we hear that if you die in battle you go to Valhalla, talk about sending each other to hell.
Okay.
Although that's not, if you will, theologically sound, quote unquote.
Right.
If they're sending each other to Valhalla.
Okay.
Um,
So hell was a very generic term, even within the scope of the different
Yeah.
places that you could go in the
Yeah.
Norse afterlife, for instance.
And for that matter, in early poetry, like the poem Atlakvida in the Poetic Edda, Valhalla is used of a human living king's hall, suggesting that at the time that poem was composed, probably early 800s, they still don't actually use it as a term for an afterlife.
Okay.
The concept of Valhalla may be pretty late.
Yeah. And hell was also a deity, correct?
Yeah, Hel is the goddess who rules in hell. She's the daughter of Loki and Angrboda. Her siblings are Jormungandr, the serpent that encircles the world, and Fenrir, the wolf who will swallow Odin at Ragnarok. She is, according to Snorri, and this is just as vague as I'm going to quote it, half with flesh color and half blue. And so people have interpreted that as meaning that she looks half living and half dead, because corpses are stereotypically blue
Interesting.
in Old Norse. Now this has led to, like if you search images of hell on DeviantArt or whatever, put safe search on, but you're going to see like a woman who's split this way, living and dead. It's not clear that that's how we should understand it. One thing, she could be split the other way, but whatever. She looks partially dead, I suppose, is the understanding that we're supposed to get of her. She's not much of an active character. She comes up sometimes, like in the death of Balder, when Hermother is sent to hell after Balder dies to try to plead with hell to send Balder back. She has a couple lines, but she's not much in evidence as a character.
Okay. In some ways, kind of like Hades in Greek mythology, where Hades has a few stories he plays a part in, like the abduction of Persephone, for instance. But other than that, there aren't a lot of stories about him.
Yeah.
He's mostly just hanging out down in his cave, ruling over the dead. Now, does she rule over the dead actively? Okay, so she's the queen of the underworld.
Right.
She is kind of a Persephone-like figure.
Definitely.
But she doesn't have a husband?
No.
Interesting.
No, and doesn't have children. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, our sources are incomplete. It's possible that somewhere there's some
Right.
husband of hell, daughter of hell, whatever. But No, that doesn't come up in our sources. Although she does have an origin, right? Like I said,
Yeah.
she's daughter of Loki.
Interesting.
She I think the contemporaneous understanding of this was that the realm was named for her, because the older name of hell looks like in the mythic past of the Eddas, it looks like Niflheimr, literally something like cloud home, is the earlier name of hell, and that after that is sort of placed under Midgard, that the realm that we live on, the solid world, that becomes known as hell after her. But probably the etymological truth is that the covered place is what names her.
Which makes sense.
But I don't think they contemporaneously understood that.
Yeah. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. Is there anything else worth saying here about hell or going back to heaven?
Well, what the hell do you want me to say? Oh, Lordy. No, I think it's a good coverage of this, and
Absolutely.
look forward to learning more about religious vocabulary and other vocabulary and word safari. You got to check out his channel, and of course, we have several other videos on this channel. One of my favorites being our history of the alphabet, which we actually split between my channel and yours.
That was a really great series. I enjoyed doing that.
I really enjoyed that. It's really kind of I'm gonna go ahead and say underappreciated series. So check that out if you haven't yet.
But you can help make it less underappreciated.
Yes, you can. You can make a difference. Well, thanks so much, everybody, and from beautiful Colorado, we're wishing you all the best.